All right, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get this party started. So I hope everyone's having a great day so far. Hope you've had a chance to go and get some food or, maybe coffee or donuts or whatever, depending on what time zone you're in or where you're at. So looking forward to kind of showing you what we have in store today. So first off, want to welcome you to today's webinar. Again, live demo webinar on Windows Server 2019 and kind of seeing it in action. My name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist for Altaro Software, the sponsor of today's webinar. And I'm really excited about today's webinar. Spent a lot of time over the last month going through some of these features, getting things ready to show you, doing some neat stuff with it. And there's a lot of great material that I have in store for you today. So I'm really looking forward to it, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun while we do it as well. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about kind of what our agenda is for the day. So first thing we're going to do is just going to do some brief introductions of myself, of Altaro, the sponsor again, and then we're going to get into what I call a word on the state of Windows Server 2019. Now, it's been really interesting preparing for this webinar, and I'm gonna go into that a little bit more here in that section, but definitely I want to at least talk about kind of where 2019 is at right now, where you can get it and that type of stuff. And then from there, we're going to start getting into really the 4 demos that you're here to see, and we start with the heavy hitter. The heavy hitter being Windows Admin Center. We did a webinar back in October that was more of a holistic overview of 2019. Myself, Rob Cordini, and Simon Perriman, we sat down and we talked about all that type of stuff. It was very PowerPoint heavy. This webinar is designed to kind of build on top of that. This one being more demo focused, more hands-on, and less of the PowerPoint. So I'm sure that's probably welcome news to everyone. And the reason I bring that up is at the end of that webinar, we did a poll, and we had a lot of respondents to that poll about what features would you like to see demoed most. And Admin Center, without a doubt, nothing else even close, was the #1 poll response. So that's definitely why we've got Admin Center as the very first demo of the day. We're going to spend quite a bit of time going through that tool and showing that to you. After that, we're going to talk about the storage migration service, which is a great new tool in 2019 used to migrate storage data, unstructured data from point A to point B. We'll talk about that. Then we're going to get into Windows Container, which that's kind of my personal favorite area of the new Windows Server stack here in 2016 and 2019. We're going to do some cool stuff there. We've got a true production workload. I'm going to spin up a Minecraft server inside of a container on a Windows server. Hopefully it's going to work. I'm pretty sure I made all the requisite sacrifices to the demo gods this morning, but we'll see. From there, we're going to talk about Windows Subsystem for Linux and how you can use that to kind of run some workloads and some Linux CLI tools inside of Windows and some of the stuff you can do with that. And then from there, we're going to do a wrap up and Q&A. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about the Q&A. We always do a follow-up blog post at Altaro that contains a full list of the Q&A. We're going to do a little bit different this time. So you're going to see an announcement later in the slide deck, and we'll get to it. We're actually launching some new community forums here at Altaro. And whereas historically we've used a blog post to have a full list of questions and answers, we're going to create a specific tag in our new forums for this webinar and tag each of these questions as a thread. And that way I can get you answers to the questions that we don't cover today. And you can also talk along, get involved, and even open up new questions if you have them. So definitely looking forward to that, and I'll have more information for you on that later in the slide deck. So from there, we'll get to the introductions. Again, my name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist with Altaro Software. I've been with the company for a number of years here, but I've been in the industry for, I actually need to change that to 16 plus years now. Every time I increase that number, I get a few more gray hairs. So dating myself a little bit, but I've been around the industry for a while. My focus has always been on, the core infrastructure stack in Windows Server, virtualization infrastructure, including Hyper-V and VMware. I also have quite a bit of Linux background as well, which is why I'm so excited to see stuff like Windows Subsystem for Linux. And this new embracement of open source by Microsoft is really nice to see. So excited about talking about some of that stuff. I'm really active on Twitter. if you want to go ahead and add me on Twitter, my handle is there. My apologies, you're going to have to spell the last name. I have a buddy who keeps telling me that I need to change my Twitter handle to Andy Syrewicze, which is what the kids used to call me in elementary school, but I just haven't gotten around to that yet. So apologies, you'll have to spell that. From there, I'm also very active on all of the Altaro blogs. We have a blog for Hyper-V and Azure and cloud-focused content. We have a blog for VMware stuff, and we also have a blog that's focused specifically on managed services providers. So if you're interested in checking out any of that content, the URLs are all right there, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. From that, a little bit of information about the sponsor of today's webinar, Altaro Software, again, the company I work for. We're a fast-growing developer of some pretty fantastic, super easy-to-use backup software, designed specifically for the SMB and the SME, and for service providers that are operating that space as well. That virtual backup solution is trusted by 40,000 plus customers and 9,000 plus partners, plus 1,000 plus MSPs worldwide. That flagship product is Altaro VM Backup. If you want a little bit more information about that, you can go to altaro.com/VM-backup for more information, or altaro.com/MSP if you want information on the MSP program specifically. So let's talk about Windows Server. That's what you're all here to talk about today, right? And I wanted to start with, like I said, just kind of a word on the state of Windows Server, because if you've been watching the tech blogs, or if you've been watching the Twitters or the Facebooks, you've probably heard that Windows Server 2019 was GA'd back in October, very early October, like the 2nd, I think, if I remember correctly. And then it was promptly pulled from circulation a couple of days after that. So if you go to the eval site today, this is what you see under 2019. You can see here that Microsoft has temporarily removed all media for Windows Server 2019 and Windows Server version 1809. And the thing here is, where this all stems from is one of the newer versions of Windows 10 contained a bug that during the upgrade process was nuking files, which is not great, you know. But the concern is that Windows Server and Windows 10 has enough code sharing that out of an abundance of caution, Microsoft has pulled the media for Server 2019. Now, that doesn't affect just Server 2019's ISOs or the installation media. That also affects things like Docker images, container images that are contained out in the Docker hub. So, you know, I mentioned earlier that it was very interesting preparing for this webinar because of mainly this. So all the demos that you see today are a collection of eval instances of Windows Server 2019, and I have to give a special shout out to an MVP buddy of mine. If he's on the call, Karsten, thank you for getting the eval media over to me. He happened to grab it on one of those days that it was actually available, and made it available to me so I get some of these demos out for today's show. So you see some of the actual GA media being used today. Additionally, for the storage migration service demo, I actually had to back rev it to the last version of the technical preview for 2019. That's build 17.744, and I'll explain that a little bit further when I get there. So a lot of the demos that you saw or that you're going to see today, they went really well in the session we did this morning. But again, a lot of it's testing media, a lot of it's media that's questionable, that's been pulled. So it may not be entirely bug free. If we run into an issue, we'll troubleshoot it together and we'll learn something along the way. So let's go ahead and talk about Windows Admin Center. So again, I mentioned earlier that this was the big thing that everyone in our last webinar wanted to see. And we did a really short demo in that webinar, like 5 minutes, just kind of showing the UI. Today, what I want to do is I actually want to kind of step through each section of the tool. You know, not every tiny section, but the major hitters. I want to show you how it works, how you can use it to manage servers, how you can look at the extensibility, that type of stuff. So, but with each demo that I do today, I want to set a baseline level of knowledge. That way, if somebody didn't make the previous webinar or they're just learning about the tools today, we all are kind of on the same page when I start the demo. So the first thing I want to do is talk about what is Windows Admin Center. And what Windows Admin Center is, it's really the next generation management tool for Windows Server. You think about the last 10, 15 years, we've been using RSAT and MMC for a long time. This tool is a great step up because it's web-based. It can run basically everywhere. You can install it on your laptop, your desktop. You can install it on a management server, on a production server, whatever. And you can access it both locally and remotely. So it's really flexible as far as being able to access it and use it when you need it. My particular favorite thing about this tool is that it's extensible. So not only has Microsoft created some extensions to give it more functionality, but they've opened it up to third-party vendors to be able to address particular needs and to plug into that tool as well. So to me, that's really interesting because I could see us eventually getting to a point to where you're really shrinking down your tool set because now you're using Admin Center for more than just managing Windows. So it's really interesting in that regard as well. One common question I get about Admin Center is it going to replace RSAT? Is it going to replace System Center Virtual Machine Manager? I hear those questions all the time, and the official answer from Microsoft is no. Admin Center is designed to complement the existing management tools. Now, my personal take, do I see RSAT and MMC being around forever? Probably not, but for the foreseeable future, I see them living side by side. But with that said, all of the active development for management tools for Windows Server is happening in Admin Center. So all the new stuff is going to be there. And then the last thing I want to kind of wrap up with on this slide is that there are integrations with Azure inside of this toolbox, or this tool. So if you are using Azure today, or you're thinking about using Azure, as we step through the tool today, you're going to kind of see some mentions of Azure, how you can kind of integrate it with different pieces of Azure as we step through the tool. One other thing I want to mention, installation, super easy. You see this link at the bottom right of the slide, aka.ms/WAC download. You go there, you download the tool, and you just run through the basic installation. Really, the only thing that you have to mess with during the installation is selecting the port number that you want it to use. Just make note of that when you install it. The only other gotcha, the first time you access it via a web browser, it's going to yell at you about certificates. You're going to be given 2 or 3 options for certificates to select. 2 of them are not labeled very well. But the third one is very clearly labeled Windows Admin Center certificate. I don't remember the exact string of text, but that's the one you want to select when you connect for the first time. One other thing about this, you're going to see links throughout. Don't feel like you have to really scribble fast to get those down before I change the slide. We will be making the slide deck available after the webinar. So that way you can just listen and not have to worry about copying down URLs as I step through stuff here. So with that, let's actually do our first demo. Let's go take a look at Admin Center. So I have Admin Center running here on my desktop, but I've added a number of different pieces of infrastructure in my lab into the tool. So when you log into Admin Center for the first time, this list is going to be very, very empty. You're going to have a single line in there for the machine that's actually running Admin Center. So in my case, that's this Windows PC here, and that's the host name. So what I've done is I've actually added a couple of different pieces in. I've added my failover cluster from my Hyper-V hosts. I've added in one of my domain controllers, and I have added a couple of the demo VMs that we're going to be using for the demos today. So the first thing I figured I'd start with is let's take a look at Admin Center. What does it look like when you are managing a standalone machine? So I have a server, I want to manage it. What does it look like? So that's what I've done here is I've selected the domain controller in my environment. And a lot of the stuff that you're going to see in here should look very familiar. A lot of this information is provided by different tools on the system itself or by the RSAT tools that we've been using for years and years, right? So starting with this dashboard, we get kind of a really nice overview. We see what version of the operating system we're running, what build, how much memory, what the uptime is, CPU, memory, all that different type of stuff. Now, the one thing that you'll notice is missing from the metrics here is storage. And they actually have a button here for enable disk metrics. And the reason it's not enabled by default, when you enable it, it warns you that saying, hey, there could be a significant storage impact for having this counter enabled. Are you sure you want to do that? In my case, yes, it's a lab environment. I'm not all that worried about it. One question we had from this morning's session was, what kind of storage impact have I seen? And to be honest, again, I'm running in a small lab environment. Usually I run my servers pretty lean on memory and CPU. I haven't seen any significant impact. Now, could be they're saying that because they don't want people to enable it on a server here, forget about it. A year goes by and that's happened on 20, 30 VMs in the environment, and now there is a significant performance impact. So maybe that's part of the reason. But long answer short, with my use case, I haven't seen any significant performance impact there yet. So you can see I've enabled it, and now I can actually see what's the disk activity like for this particular server. Again, it's a DC for small environments, not a lot going on there, right? So I'm going to be a good IT admin here, and I'm going to do what it says and stop collecting disk metrics, and we're going to move on. And the other nice thing here, especially if you're used to working with the Azure portal at all, as you do actions, as errors pop up, you're going to see a list, a log of activities here in the top right, which is really handy. So as we step through the list here, a couple of, like I said, I'm not going to go through every specific area, but I want to touch on kind of the key spots, some of my favorite areas. If you've ever run server core, which is the preferred method for running Hyper-V host specifically, and other infrastructure workloads, if you've ever run server core, you've known that dealing with specific device drivers and things like that has been very difficult because you don't have things like Device Manager available to you. What this does is this really plugs that hole, because now I can run a server core box in my environment. I can connect to it with Admin Center, and here I can update drivers, I can disable devices. Now this DC is a Hyper-V VM, so I mean there's not really a whole lot of physical hardware here for me to modify, but you get the idea. It gives you a little bit more functionality than we had before, which is a nice thing. The other thing I like here is you can view the event viewer, and my gut feels like it's a little bit faster than Event Viewer is itself on the local machine. I actually used this week when I was prepping all these demos. I actually found a time skew issue on my DCs by using this tool. And I caught that before the webinar today. Otherwise, if it got bad enough, I might have had issues with my DCs, right? So, but as you can see, if I come over here and filter it just like I would using Event Viewer itself, now I can see that, oh yeah, I was working with the time service last night in the last couple of days, right? You can actually drill down and see what was going on. You could look at the details. I mean, it's Event Viewer, but in a web format, which is really handy. From there, we can do things like look at files. Some of these screens, they load a little bit slow because I'm hitting my storage pretty hard for some of these demos and some of the stuff I've got running in the background. But you can browse the files and folders. Another really cool area that I'm very happy to see, especially if I go back to that server core discussion, is the firewall area here. I mean, how many people have beat their head against a wall because they're trying to configure firewall rules on the command line on a server core box? I'll raise my hand. I'm not ashamed to admit. I mean, I can do it if I have to. Doesn't mean I like doing it, So what this does is this makes it really easy for me to come in here and actually modify and change rules for the Windows firewall without having to deal with it directly on the server core box, which is really, really handy. From there, I can do a lot of the other usual stuff, installed apps, local users and groups. I can actually run PowerShell directly from within the browser. So you see here that it's open to remote connection to the server, so I can say host name, and I can basically type whatever I want in here, get process, list of processes. It's PowerShell. It's the same as if I opened up a PowerShell prompt on my laptop and I said, enter PS session in the computer name. So I mean, it's not like a groundbreaking type of thing, but it's really handy. Again, kind of that all-in-one encompassing single pane of glass tool, right? I can get a list of processes. That's just telling me I'm going to disconnect from the remote session, so nothing to worry about there. List of processes. I can look at registry, remote desktop, services, and even run updates from here as well. I run Windows updates on all my machines right from this tool. So really handy when doing management, especially of server core boxes, which again is Microsoft's preferred method for infrastructure workloads these days. So we've kind of talked about managing a server, standalone server. I want to show you what it looks like for a failover cluster now. So as you'll know, if you run a failover cluster in your environment, the tool we've always used in the past was Cluster Manager, right? And this is really a Windows Admin Centerified version of Cluster Manager. So it's going to dump us here at an overview of the entire cluster. This is just a small 2-node Hyper-V cluster. So I can see, you know, what my cluster name is. I can see cluster IP, you know, the infrastructure resources, how many clustered roles, number of disks. Again, this is a fairly small cluster here. But the other nice thing that I really like about this view is the virtual machines view. One thing that's always been a little bit difficult with Hyper-V in the past, especially if you're not running System Center Virtual Machine Manager, is getting that holistic view of your Hyper-V environment. And this view right here does a fantastic job of that. So what this view here does is it's telling me, hey, you know, I've got 11 virtual machines on the environment, but it gives me an overarching view into the CPU and memory utilization of the entire cluster. So, you know, when you're running a cluster, you want to maintain that N+1 status of the cluster, right? That way you can tolerate a host failure in the case of a hardware failure, right? Here you can come in and very easily see, okay, are my utilizations under 50%? I'm sitting at just over 35, and I'm sitting pretty good. So it's just kind of a nice quick area that you can go to look and see what's going on with the cluster. The other nice thing here is we have access, quick and easy access, again, to the event viewer, but specifically the Hyper-V event logs for this particular cluster. So, you know, I can drill down into each of the different logs and kind of see what's going on. So again, it's all about making easy and ready access to that data very easily accessible, and they've done a really good job with it, in my opinion. The last thing I want to show on this particular view is you can also pull up virtual switches, and you can pull up a very specific virtual machine inventory. So I love this view too because it gives me so much information. I can see a list of all the different virtual machines, what hosts they're running on, what the CPU is, the CPU utilization, and the memory pressure is very interesting to me because I use dynamic memory on a lot of my virtual machines. So even though they're configured with a lot more than they're probably using, here I can come in and I can see, okay, how high is the pressure, which gives me an idea of when the host is going to allocate more memory resources to that virtual machine. So this is a really handy screen, really fun to see. You can also start and stop and you know, do all kinds of different stuff with your virtual machines here. You can take checkpoints, look at settings, download the RDP file, all kinds of different stuff. And the other thing that I like to mention here, talking about downloading the RDP files, if you've used Azure, you know that's how Azure functions when you want to remote connect to a machine. You download the RDP file. This tool is designed to be able to not only manage servers and infrastructure inside of your existing AD domain forest, but other forests, other domains, standalone machines. You can insert and use different credentials when you're on that main screen. I'll head back there. When you add in new machines here, you can actually define the type of credential you want to use when you're adding these things. So it really makes managing anything out there in the Windows side very simple and easy to use. So really handy, great tool. One other thing I want to mention before we move on is you see there's mention here of hyperconverged cluster manager. Hyperconverged infrastructure, if you're not aware, is the idea that we put virtualization and storage in the same boxes. So in the Microsoft world, that would mean, okay, I'm going to have a small, you know, I'm going to have a cluster of some sort, maybe not necessarily small, but you're going to have a cluster. But you're going to run not only Hyper-V on those cluster nodes, you're going to run storage spaces direct, which will spread the storage across all of those nodes. Now, storage spaces direct is amazing technology. Microsoft has done a great job with it. But the thing I think that, and this is a personal opinion, but I think the thing that's held them back in adoption was the lack of a good management tool. Historically, you always had to use PowerShell to manage storage spaces direct. But now with Admin Center, you can use this tool to manage storage spaces direct. So I think you're going to see the adoption start to increase strictly because this tool exists now. So that's what that whole section is for. And then computer management, that's just like if I wanted to manage my Windows PC type of thing. Pretty self-explanatory there. So again, great tool here. I really like it. And I'll go ahead and take a quick look and see if there are any questions. Let's see. Take maybe one or two here, and then we'll move on. So let's see. Is there any plan to release Windows Admin Center in a detached installable format for older Windows? That's a good question. I haven't heard that there is any, but definitely in the follow-up forum post, if I find anything, I'll be sure to mention that. But as far as I know, I haven't seen anything. Can I start downloading this image now? Yep, you can go ahead and download Windows Admin Center. It's available right now, aka.ms/WAC. I'll have to look at the slide deck. WAC install, I think, is what it was. Let me get that for you. Let's see. WAC download. Sorry. So yeah, definitely you can go ahead and download it today. Let's see. All right. I just, for the sake of time, want to go ahead and move on. We have 3 other demos to do and 34 minutes left. So, one other question here that came up I want to make sure we address is Nano Server no longer under development? Actually, I'll talk about that in the container section. Nano Server is still very much alive and out there. They just changed the use case around a little bit. I'll talk about that in the container section. So with that, let's move on to the storage migration service. Let's continue on with the slide deck here. What is the storage migration service? Again, setting a baseline for make sure we're still on the same page. The storage migration service is a new service that was added in Windows Server 2019 to really take the headache out of data migrations. It's designed to move unstructured data from basically anywhere into Azure and modern Windows Server. Modern Windows Server being Windows Server 2008 R2, sorry, scratch that, 2012 R2 or newer. Now, what's really interesting about this tool is that it can be used to move data not only from 2008 R2 or 2008, it also supports moving data from 2003, which is a fantastic, fantastic, cool thing. I mean, you shouldn't be running 2003, but there are still a ton of 2003 boxes out there. And Microsoft, knowing this, designed the tool that they could help people get off those old 2003 boxes. So when I say that it moves unstructured data, what that really means is that it's moving data. It's not moving applications. So if you have an application running on an old box, you're still going to have to install that application at the destination. This just moves the data. So that's one thing I always like to mention there. It requires Windows Admin Center. It's just a nice, easy to drive wizard. I'm going to show you here in a second. And the other big requirement is that the machines have to be domain joined. The source and the destination have to reside within the same Active Directory forest. So that's some of the requirements today. There are also some firewall requirements. So if you're going across the WAN, you may have to poke some holes there. You might have to configure the Windows firewall as well. I don't have those in the slide deck, but I'll make sure I get them in the follow-up forum posts so you can go ahead and see what those are. It's just 3 of them though. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, unfortunately. So from there, I just want to kind of talk about what the process looks like logically. So on the right-hand side, this is an image from docs.microsoft.com that really does a good job of explaining how it works. So we've got our source machines at the bottom. You see 2003 all the way up to 2019. The data and config goes through the storage migration service out to the various destinations, whether that's Azure File Sync on premises, Azure Files and Azure, Azure IaaS VMs, or Windows Server somewhere on premises. You've got a lot of different options as to where you want to put stuff. And the way that the process works is you've got really 3 steps. First thing that we got to do is we got to inventory. We're gonna, do an inventory of the source machine, what's there, what needs to be moved, and then we go to the actual transfer stage. Now the transfer happens. Once that's done, Now you have the optional cutover stage. Now what's interesting here, and probably the most common question that I've come up with, is what happens during that cutover stage? And probably the most common thing that people are going to do is you can have the destination assume the identity of the source, meaning the destination, the machine you're migrating to, will not only assume the host name of the old machine, it will also assume the IP addressing and all of the networking information as well. That way, to workstations and other machines on the network, the migration is seamless. That's what the design is. As far as the old system, the source machine goes, you can do a couple of different things. You can just have it powered off, or you can also set it so that it gets a DHCP address. So the machine is still on, but it's not identifiable like it was on the network before. That way the data is still there. You can get to it as the admin if you need to for some reason, and away you go. So from there, let's actually take a look at this. And what I did, and if you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen this. How long has it been since anybody has seen this screen? So I actually took the liberty of installing a 2003 box. And I had to go take a shower after I was done doing this. But this morning's session, I didn't show the 2003 section of the demo because I didn't have it working properly, and due to other bugs and getting all the other demos around, I didn't have time to troubleshoot it. Well, between sessions here, I troubleshot it, and I think I figured out what the issue was. So we're gonna try it, we're gonna find out. But even if it fails, you're still gonna see what the process looks like and how things work here. So I've got a 2003 box here. This is I think the 64-bit edition. It's not patched, it's just whatever the installation media had. And I also have a server 2019 box here. Again, this is not the GA bits, this is a 17744 build. And the reason why it's not the GA bits, let me go down here. If you look at this screen, so when I started doing this and setting up this demo with the GA installation media, lo and behold, I could not find the storage migration service anywhere. I couldn't find it in the extensibility settings in Admin Center. I couldn't find it in Admin Center anywhere. And it appears that I was not the only one to run across this. There is an open bug. It's been open for 28 days. There's not been a lot of activity on it, but it's still open, which tells me that there's an issue there of some sort. So if you want to test this feature, you got to go get that insider preview build 17744. And that will allow you to test out and use this feature. So I just want to make sure I mentioned that. With that said, I've got it installed. I've got storage migration service set up and running on this 17744 box. I just connect to it using Admin Center, and you'll see the storage migration service show up over here in the left-hand pane here in a second. One other thing I want to mention is the storage migration service. It's an extension of Admin Center. So you see here the storage migration service in the bottom left. If I go up here to settings for Admin Center and go to extensions, this is a list of all the available extensions for Admin Center today. So you can see here that there are a number of different Microsoft ones, like there's a container preview extension available here at the top, but there's a couple of third-party vendors here too. Data On, Fujitsu, Pure Storage, a lot of different options here. So again, really exciting to see that extensibility built in here. If I go over to installed extensions and I look way down the list, I get this msft.sme.storage-migration. So that is the storage migration extension. So going back to the machine that we are going to be transferring to, again, the 17744 2019 box here. And we're going to use that 2003 box as the source. So think about that for a second. I am transferring to a 2019 server from a server that is 16, am I doing my math there? Yes, 16 years prior. Math is hard. So I was graduating from high school when 2003 came out. Again, dating myself, but anyway, that's what we're going to try to do today. So we're going to wait for the storage migration service to load up here. Like I mentioned earlier, my admin center install is a little bit slow because it's not on the quickest storage. It's on a couple of old 7200 RPM drives, so sorry. Anyway, when you come in here, you're not going to see this right away. You're going to see a little box that says install the storage migration service. It's a one-click install. You click the install button and it takes care of the service installation and all the stuff under the hood for you. And what you do is you come in here and you click close, and we've got this concept of a job. So you can see that I've already run an inventory on a source machine. I ran an inventory on a 2016 file server I have here in my environment. That's where the 277 gigs comes from. But like I said, I think I've got that 2003 box working, so we're gonna go ahead and set up a new job specifically for that. So we're gonna call this 2003 migration, and one quick note, spaces are not allowed in the title here. So that's why it looks like I have terrible punctuation and grammar there. All right, so let's look at this 2003 migration. What credentials do I want to use to migrate? So I'm just going to use my domain credentials here. This is where I fat finger my password, I'm sure. And I have the option of selecting the administrative shares if I want to. In this particular case, not going to because I don't really see the need. But if you want to, you can. And now I have to add the device to scan. So if I remember correctly, my source device is demo DST-2003. And we'll just give it the fully qualified domain name. And it's going to add it to the list, and we now have to start a scan. Now, the first time I tried this, cross your fingers and let's hope it works. First time I tried this, I got a weird result. It ran and it gave me a path not found error. But the weird thing was I could still see bits and pieces of the configuration. And what I suspect the reason why is if you try to access a file share on an older 2003 box from a newer machine, you're going to get the illustrious SMB1 error message saying, hey, this is really insecure. You really shouldn't do that, and we're not going to let you. So what I've done since then is I've actually, and don't tell Ned Pyle, the PM for storage migration service, he has a, what do I want to call it, a war on SMB1. Don't tell him, but I installed SMB1 support on this 2019 server in order to do this, and it succeeded this time. So if I come down here, now I can see that, oh, hey, I've got a share with company data in it. I just named the share company data. It contains about 8 gigs worth of stuff. It's just a couple of ISOs really, and that's what we've got. So now that the inventory is done, I'm gonna hit next. And now we're actually in the transfer data phase. So now I'm gonna put in my credentials again. Hit next. Now I need to add the destination mappings for demo DST 2003. So I'm going to include this device, destination device. Include this device. And maybe I'm going to have issues again here because now it's not giving me the option to map it. And see, this is what I get for running, trial software. Okay. Well, I was really excited hoping that was going to work, but for the sake of demo, I'm going to go back to my other job that I created earlier, and that is migration test. I at least want you to be able to see the different options here. So I'm going to use the store credentials. Basically, this is the job where I inventoried my 2016 file server. I'm going to figure out what the bug is with the 2003 migration. We're going to map it to the new machine, which it didn't for some reason. See how I just filled it out automatically here. So now we're going to this destination machine, again, the machine that I'm connected from, running the storage migration service from. Basically, here you come in and you say, okay, we're going to map the source to this destination. That's essentially what you're doing on the screen. Now, the source in this case has way more data than the destination can provide. So obviously, if we tried doing the migration, it would fail. And it would take forever because there's almost 300 gigs of data. But again, I just want to step through this process so you can see all the different steps. So here you can adjust some of the transfer settings, how the actual transfer functions and works. You can configure retries and delays and that type of thing. And then you can come down here into validate devices. Here, you're going to run a validation. I'm not going to run it because it's going to fail. And then in the next screen, you actually start the transfer. And once you start the transfer, you wait for it to finish. You get to step 3. You just have a couple of options there to determine how do you want the cutover to happen. Do you want to do a cutover? Do you want to do it manually? Do you want to configure those different IP address and host name cutover options? That type of stuff is on step 3. So with that, we've got about 20 minutes left. I've got 2 more demos to go. I think we're going to move on to the next thing. But I want to do a couple of questions here. Let's see. How do you install Windows Admin Center when your admin computer is not connected to the internet? Ask for a certificate that only can be downloaded when you're connected to the net. Same question for the extensions. Are they available offline? I do know that the installation for Admin Center is just an executable, so you can move the executable wherever. Having it be connected to the internet for the certificate is news to me. I haven't run across that. Of course, I've only run it on machines connected to the internet as well. I'll take a look at that one and I'll address it in the follow-up forum questions. As far as the extension go, you can, the nice thing about the extensions is you can actually point to a local extension repository. I don't think that's the terminology they use, but that's essentially what it amounts to, is it's an extension repository. Let's see. 2003 brings back memories. It certainly does, and not all of them good. Not all of them good. Let's see. All right. Now, there's not a couple of really deep questions here, and keep them coming, guys. Really appreciate it. The ones that I can't quickly answer right now, I'll be sure to cover in the follow-up post. But I want to make sure we have enough time for the other 2 demos. We've got 18 minutes left, so I'm going to move on. So let's go and look at containers. Containers is the next thing on our list. And the first thing I want to start with is, why should I use a container? So as you can see in the right-hand picture here, a container is kind of like a VM. It's not a VM, but very similar in that it's an encapsulated image with just the application that you want to run. So in this case, you can see we've got our infrastructure at the bottom, we've got our host operating system, then we got the Docker layer, which is the container engine, and then your different containerized applications on top of it. And with Docker and containers, you download a container image and you use that image to deploy containers. And I get asked all the time, why would I use a container? And the biggest thing comes with what I would call density improvements. Let's say you're running a fairly large cluster inside of your environment. You've got 50 virtual machines. How many instances of the same operating system are running inside of that cluster environment? That's a lot of overhead that you don't need. Containers really allow you to get rid of that extra overhead by, running your applications and workloads containerized whilst sharing the kernel of the container host itself. Now, you may hear that and think, oh, well, it's sharing the kernel of the container host. Isn't that a security issue? Potentially, yes, depending on your environment, but Microsoft has created what's called Hyper-V containers for that type of situation, where you're in a high security environment or you're in a hosting environment where you don't trust everything. You have the option of just passing a command line argument, -- isolation equals Hyper-V, and that will tell the container host, hey, I need to wrap this container up inside of a Hyper-V isolation layer, basically, and it still runs and functions as a container, but it's more isolated. It has its own running kernel at that point. So other reasons are, consistency of deployment. This takes a lot of the human factor out of workload deployment, makes the deployments easier patch cycles. And my favorite thing is a container can run pretty much anywhere. I can take a container and build it on my laptop. I can push it to a Windows server, run it from there. I can push it to a Linux container host, run it there. I can send it over to my wife's Mac and I can run it there. I can push it up to Azure and AWS and run it there. I mean, it literally will run anywhere. That's one of the coolest things about it. It really makes that type of stuff easy. Installing containers is a little different depending on the platform that you want to install it on. If you want to install it on Windows Server, I actually have been working on a container series on our MSP blog. I've got the URL right there. You can check that out. That will get you up and running with Windows containers on a Windows server. The demo I'm going to show you right now, though, is actually Linux containers on a Windows server, which is a slightly different installation process, which I'll be blogging about in a future segment. So let's hop over to my container host. So I've got a Windows Server 2019 GA container host here with the experimental version of Docker, the container engine, installed. So you see here we've got preview 3. So if I do Docker image and list the images available, I see that I've already pulled down a couple of images from the container registry, or the Docker Hub is what it's called. The nice thing about the Docker Hub is that if you go out here and you look up, one of the container images I have, in this case, the Minecraft server, I've got all kinds of information about this particular container, how to interact with it, how to use it, and I can see open issues, a lot of great information here. And one of my favorite things about containers is I can use them to spin up workloads quickly without having to install an operating system, without having to install and configure whatever workload I'm using. In this case, we have a true production workload, Minecraft, right? We're really big on Minecraft here in the Syrewicze house. So it's a critical workload here, but maybe not everywhere else, priorities, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to spin up this Minecraft server. So this is a fairly long command, but we're going to use Docker run. We're going to pass a couple of options to it. The important ones here are the -e. What -e does is it tells Docker, okay, we need to pass a few environmental variables through to the container. So Minecraft requires that you accept the EULA. So that's what the first one does. The second environment variables, init memory and max memory, that configures the maximum and minimum amount of memories the Java Minecraft server can utilize. The next important one is the 25565, this section right here. What this does is it binds this container to those ports on the container host IP address. And then we're naming the Minecraft server, or the container, MC for Minecraft. And then we're telling it what container image to use. So let's go ahead and deploy this. And we'll see what happens. There we go. I didn't hit enter correctly, I guess. So what it's going to do is it's going to spit out, a randomly generated UID for the container instance. And in a second here, it's going to act like it's done. It's going to give me back to the command line. So there we go. And I'm going to go Docker container ls to list all the current containers. And I can see here, I've got this Minecraft server starting, health is starting. And I can keep doing that to kind of get a good idea of, what it's doing. If I want to look and see what's actually happening inside the container, though, I can do Docker logs MC, which is what we named the container, right? And now I can see, okay, what's going on inside of the container, which is really interesting. So here I can see, okay, we're setting up the world seed, the level seeds getting generated, checking JSON files. We've got our initial memory to 512 meg and our max to 512 megs. So it's doing its thing. So we're going to give this a few minutes and we're going to move on to the Windows Subsystem for Linux demo. Then we'll come back and see if this actually started like it was supposed to. So cross your fingers. All right, so one thing I wanted to wrap up with on containers is what makes a good candidate for an application to be containerized. The easy choices here are stateless apps, web apps, IIS, Apache, things like that. Bit murky, but more doable these days because now you can have stateful applications inside of containers. You can attach a container to persistent storage outside of the container. Things like the Microsoft Message Queue, SQL Server. Not quite there yet are things like infrastructure roles. You're not going to run AD inside of a container. You're not going to run a file server inside of a container. You're not going to use GUI apps inside of a container. That's not what they're really intended for. So just some things to keep in mind there, just a quick list when you're making those determinations. To keep moving here, I want to make sure we have time to get through everything. We're going to talk about Windows Subsystem for Linux while that Minecraft container server's moving on the way. So Windows Subsystem for Linux, another great feature that I'm excited about. This allows you to run Linux CLI applications on Windows. So what it does is it basically, you create a Linux distribution in a directory on your machine, and you can actually run command line utilities out of that distribution like you were running it in Linux. Now, I say CLI applications, that's the supported use case. I have seen folks, and I've done it myself a little bit, that will actually take like an open source X server that you can install on Windows. The one I'm thinking of is called Xming. You can actually install that X server on Windows and refer to it using a command line switch in Windows Subsystem for Linux, and actually launch GUI Linux applications in Windows. There's some hackish type of stuff you have to do to get the fonts to render correctly and things like that. It's kind of neat. It works. It is not supported in any way, shape, or form to do it that way. But like I said, it works and it's kind of fun to tinker with. But as far as supportability goes, your CLI applications work. And really, what's the use case here for Linux, Windows Subsystem for Linux? Why wouldn't I just run a VM? Well, this requires less resources than a Linux VM. It's really designed for cross-platform workloads. So maybe you have a workload that you have to run somewhere that requires some stuff from the open source world, and it requires some stuff from the Windows world. And I attended Microsoft Ignite a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions I had for the Windows Server team was use cases around this feature. And one of the answers I got was to be determined. They created this tool and they want to see what the community decides to do with it. So get creative, try all kinds of different stuff with this if you want. It's really kind of interesting to see what we can do. There's a couple of different ways to install it depending on whether you're doing it on a workstation or a Windows server. The URL I have here tells you how to do it on a server, and let's actually take a look at that. So I've got a Windows Subsystem for Linux machine here that I've already installed an OpenSUSE instance on. So you can see here, I've got the OpenSUSE directory, but I've got the zip file. And using those instructions I just linked, I extracted that zip file out into this OpenSUSE directory. And you see I've got an OpenSUSE 42 executable. And I could add that to my environment path and just type OpenSUSE anywhere, on the machine and get it to run, but I haven't set that up. So I'm just going to run the executable, and I'll be dumped out to a Linux command line here in just a second. Usually doesn't take too long. So there we are. I can see that I'm now inside of the Linux machine. So I've got bin there. One thing that OpenSUSE has is a command line package manager called Zipper. So if I do this, I can look up the help for Zipper. So I know I'm inside the OpenSUSE environment and Zipper's available. Just for fun, let's use Zipper to install elinks. Case sensitive. Oh, my bad. I need to tell Zipper what to do. Live demo, anything can happen. All right, so we are going to install elinks. And if you're not aware, elinks is a text-based web browser inside of Linux. And it's just kind of fun for a demo like this. So let's, we've installed it, so it's available now. If I do elinks, google.com, there's Google. We have Google up and running. So text-based web browser running an OpenSUSE on top of Windows. Whoever thought that was going to happen 10 years ago. Let's do a search. And it works. So kind of a neat little demo there. You can do all kinds of different things with it. You have all the Linux command line utilities available to you. And it's really fun. The other thing I want to mention is if you install this feature on Windows 10, if you go out to the Windows Store, you have different versions of Linux distributions available. You got OpenSUSE 42, 15, which 15 is actually newer than 42. I'm not sure how that works. We've got Ubuntu. I think Debian's available as well. So a lot of different options there. You actually just hit the install button here, and it does a lot of what these instructions over here do for you. So with that, let's go take a look at our container host really quick. And let's see what's going on. So containers, uh-oh, it shows as unhealthy. Did I break it? Let's see what's going on. Oh, so the server's up and running, but I think I allocated too little memory to it. I bet you it's still working though. Let's go fire up Minecraft real quick and see. again, priority, production workload here. So priorities. Let's actually fire this up and see if the server is running. I forget what IP this has. Okay, 10.0.20.112. The other thing you'll notice here is the V Ethernet adapter. You typically only see that on Hyper-V hosts. The reason why you see that is because Hyper-V is in fact installed on this container host. If you want to use Hyper-V isolation, you have to have the Hyper-V role installed on the container host. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the server here, and we'll call it Dockerified MC server. And what was it? 112, 10.0.20.112. Cross your fingers. There it is. It's working. So I've got a vanilla Minecraft server powered by Docker. I don't know how well it's going to work, and I'm sure you don't want to sit here and watch me play Minecraft, but let's at least make sure that the workload is there and working. And look at that. It works. All right. That's cool. All right. I'll have to come back to that game later. So anyway, we'll move on to the final section of the webinar. So with that, we've got wrap up and Q&A. I've got a couple of slides here about a few things on the Altaro side. As I go through this stuff, I'm going to give you some time to get your last questions in, to at least make sure they make it into the list. We'll do some more questions after I finish my spiel here. It's, like I said, want to make sure you have enough time to get some more of your questions in, and we'll come back and we'll cover a couple of questions here at the end. We're getting pretty close to the top of the hour. I'm probably going to go over on time about 5 minutes to make sure we at least have a little bit of time to address questions that you guys have. But just kind of stick with me here, and we'll get to those in just a second. So one thing I wanted to point out, I mentioned that we did a previous Windows 2019 webinar back in October. If you're interested in taking a look at that, getting some more 2019 information, you can watch that webinar on demand at our website at altaro.com/webinars.php. So you can go ahead and watch that webinar in its entirety if you're interested in that. Again, I mentioned that we're going to be using our new forums to list and track all of the questions from this webinar as individual threads, and we'll have a nice neat tag that you can use to get a list of just those questions from this webinar. So you be sure to keep an eye on your email. We'll be sure to send you out the link to that when it's ready, because those are going to be going live here shortly. And then I want to talk about Altaro VM Backup really quick, why you guys are still getting your questions in. Again, I'm going to cover those, and I'm going to get to your questions here as soon as I finish up these last couple of slides. So I want to talk about our backup application real quick. We focus on 4 key things here at Altaro when it comes to our backup application. It's got to be fast, easy to use, and efficient to set up. With that said, ease of use does not mean lack of features. We provide a number of advanced features. We want to make sure that you have full, powerful control of your backup operations. And the one thing that I'm probably most proud of is our support team. Our support team is fantastic. We don't do tiered support here at Altaro. When you call, you get an answer quickly, and the person that answers the phone is a product expert, and they own your issue from start to finish. Nothing but good things to say about our support folks. And some of our latest developments, we can go directly to an Azure storage account, which I'm going to show you really quick here in a second. You can do continuous data protection for RTOs as low as 5 minutes. And we've got replication coming soon as well. As far as Windows Server 2019 goes, we're going to have support for that by end of year. And again, if you're interested in more information on that, go to altaro.com/vm-backup. Also, a little bit of information on our MSP program. When you sign up for our MSP program, it's a monthly operational expenditure model, so just a monthly subscription. You get all the bells and whistles, and again, it's pay per month, and there's no contracts associated with that. Get more information on that at altaro.com/MSP. And I wanted to just show you really quick, I mentioned ease of use, and being as we're having a Microsoft discussion, I figured I would at least show this. If you want to set up a Azure storage account to be an offsite storage target, super easy. You come into our backup locations view here. You see I've already got an Azure storage account for for some of my virtual machines, but if you want to add another, offsite locations, cloud backup to an Azure storage account, and all we need is the connection string. We don't need a VM or anything inside of Azure. We just need the connection string. And if you want to, you're not sure how to get that connection string or set up a storage account, you click this link right here and we'll walk you through the whole process. So very easy to use and easy to consume. So from there, let's actually talk about our Q&A. And I want to start with a poll. we actually have two polls that I'm going to throw at you here. The first one centers around, of these features, which is your favorite? Which one do you find most valuable? I definitely want to get your input here. So as you guys are taking a look at that poll, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the questions. So let's see here. Oh, let's see. A lot of great questions. Keep them coming, guys. Definitely, like I said, if we don't get to your questions today, we will make sure that we address them in the follow-up blog posts. Let's see. How is the storage migration different from a file copy? It is at the block level, I believe. So it's pretty quick and efficient. They want it to be as efficient as possible. Oh, looks like our first poll is done. Admin Center. Yeah, that's kind of what I expected, especially after seeing the poll from the very first session that we did earlier today. So that's really interesting. Definitely, it's a big hitter feature, and that's the thing that everyone's excited about. So yeah, definitely interested to see that. We'll go ahead and we'll put the second poll up here while I'm still looking through the questions list. We have another poll here centered more around adoption. When do you think you're going to adopt Server 2019? And I'm fairly certain I know exactly how this one's going to turn out, especially after the recent issues surrounding its release. I'm fairly certain I know how it's going to turn out, but I'm kind of curious anyway. So while you guys are doing that, let's do a couple more questions. Let's see. Does the new version of Windows allow native Docker Linux images? So really what that came down to when I was testing this and setting up the demo that you just saw, I had to install the test version of Docker. That's the Docker Enterprise Edition. I'm actually, like I said, I'm going to put together a blog post on how exactly that installation goes. And you can issue a command line command that will switch Docker from running Linux to Windows commands at the command line. I was actually going to demo that, but there was a bug in switching back and forth. Once I switched it to Linux VMs, I could not get it to go back the other direction. So yeah, there was a little bit of a bug there. Again, it's a preview build of that version of Docker. As far as Linux, native Docker Linux images go, yeah, once you have it in that Linux container mode, yeah, you could run Linux images all day long, Debian, Ubuntu, all that different kind of stuff. So definitely. Let's see. Is it safe to assume the built-in PowerShell extensions in WAC runs in elevated permissions? I don't know exactly 100% sure, but I suspect it would utilize the permissions of the account you connected to the server or cluster with. So, you know, when you're adding in new things in the Windows Admin Center, you have to define what credentials are you going to use to connect to that endpoint. I suspect PowerShell will utilize those permissions there. Let's see, a couple other questions. Let's see. How is Linux subsystem for Windows isolated from the Windows machine? Can you damage hosting machine from Linux commands easily? Is it dangerous, to put simply? It can be. So, you know, if you look at my Windows subsystem for Linux machine, let me exit this and exit the WSL. It's just a directory. But the thing is if you're using the Linux tools, you can navigate out and browse the Windows directory and the file structure. So I mean, yeah, if you're thinking about a command like rm dash capital R for recursive and F for force, you could potentially nuke your file system if you're not careful. So again, kind of comes back to that whole, you know, with great power comes great responsibility thing. So I mean, it's just like any other command line utility. So yeah, definitely you want to be careful. Let's see, how is OS licensing in containers, license per container or per server? Yeah, that's a good question. That question comes up quite frequently. The licensing, It's different based on whether you're using Windows containers or Hyper-V containers. So I mentioned Windows containers, that's that mode where the containers are utilizing and sharing the kernel of the container host. You can run as many Windows containers as you want with your license. When you start running Hyper-V containers, which again adds that additional security isolation, now you have to license them like virtual machines. So now you're talking, okay, if I'm going to run 2 Hyper-V containers in a container host, I can run 2 of those with the standard edition. If I need to run more than that, now you're looking at data center licensing, and things get a little more complicated from there. We actually have a licensing ebook at Altaro here. That's for 2016, but not a lot changed with licensing from 2016 to 2019. We'll be updating that at some point for 2019, and I'll be sure to share a link out on that. But to my knowledge, as of today, that's how the licensing works. Let's see. I think we have time for one more. I don't want to keep you too much longer here. Let's see. I want to find a good one. Let's see. A lot of great questions, guys. And again, even if you have a question right now and you're afraid it won't get answered, make sure it gets in the list, because I'll be making sure it gets answered in the follow-up forum posts. Latency requirements for WAC, used at over 150 ms, horrible performance. Yeah, I suppose I could see that. I mean, the performance was horrible. I would hope that it would be designed to handle some latency jitter, but 150 ms. Well, across the WAN though, that's not out of the question. Yeah, I have not looked at the latency requirements specifically, but if I dig up any information on that, I'll be sure to share it on the forums. So with that, I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone's time, and we'll go ahead and call that good for the day. I'll just leave you with a couple of different resources here on the screen, a link to our blogs, our social media feeds. If you have any follow-up questions that didn't make it into the questions form today, be sure to follow up with me. Let me know. I'm more than happy to have a conversation offline. If you have any further questions, hit me up on Twitter. I'm here to help. So with that said, I really hope you enjoyed today's demos, and I think most of them were successful with maybe a few bugs here and there, but we got through it. And I hope you really got some insight as to how some of the new features work and hopefully where they can fit inside of your organization. So with that, again, hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and I'll let you go and have a great day. Thanks for watching.